So Tulsi Gabbard went on American News Headquarters on Fox News. It's the show that I've been on before. The host is a guy named Leland Vittert, and he smeared her to her face. That's pretty much what happened. And he did it by cynically weaponizing this absolutely horrific terrorist attack in Sri Lanka. And what he does is he uses this to push for U.S. interventionism around the world. So what happened was it was a terrorist attack. You had all these, I think it was a bunch of churches that were targeted. This is on Easter Sunday. A bunch of churches were targeted and some high-end hotels were targeted. And now, if I'm not mistaken, as of the time of this recording, the death toll is around 300 people. 300. So it is a disgusting, religiously motivated terrorist attack, and to use that on the day it happens, I mean, doing it any time is bad, but on the day it happens, to use this to smear an anti-war candidate is just not just gross, but like also really stupid. So let's watch and then we'll discuss.
America pulls back from taking these groups on. Doesn't it just allow more attacks like this?
We need to take the threat of terrorism very seriously. As a soldier, I enlisted after the attacks on 9/11 to take on these terrorist groups who attacked us and who took thousands of American lives. Soldiers, service members, people across the country who enlisted after 9/11 take this threat very seriously, which is why we are so offended and angered by actions that this administration has taken to cozy up to and to support the interests of countries like Saudi Arabia, who are the #1 propagator of this very same ideology that fuels terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
I think it's fair to say that the Saudis have cracked down on Wahhabism
around the world.
The Saudis have cracked down on Wahhabism in a pretty significant way. You, on the other hand, have gone and met with Bashar Assad and said the U.S. should essentially try to take our boot off his neck.
I want to correct you on this. The Saudis have not cracked down on the spread of Wahhabism. They continue to spend billions of dollars spreading this ideology around the world, which is providing this fertile recruiting ground, which is fueling terrorist organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. It is a country that continues to provide direct and indirect support to terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda.
Could you try to answer my question about Assad? How does taking...
I'm correcting... No, I want to stop.
I understand that we can disagree on the issue of...
We can about terrorist attacks
we can disagree on the issue...
Country. We are talking about this administration.
What about Iran? Should we have our foot on the neck of Iran? You asked me to come here to share my views on these issues. I'm trying to share them, and you're not allowing me to do so, and that's unfortunate because these are issues that threaten the safety and security of the American people. You made a statement that is false about Saudi Arabia, and it speaks directly to actions that this administration has taken in continuing to support the interests of Saudi Arabia. Continuing to take sides in this you've made your point about Saudi Arabia. Let's move on to Iran. You've made your point about Saudi Arabia. Let's move on to Iran. Should the United States have its boot on the neck of the Iranian regime that supports terror all around the world, or not? Because you have a policy of taking our boot off the neck of one of Iran's closest allies, which is Bashar Assad. So with respect to Iran, yes or no, should the United States be tough on them and continue to try to force regime change?
First of all, let me be clear about you are completely twisting and misconstruing my policies, and you're not really giving me the chance to convey clearly what they are. When we're talking about terrorists, who attacked us on 9/11? The majority of those who attacked us on 9/11, did they come from Iran?
All but one came from Saudi Arabia.
Did they?
I said all but one came from Saudi Arabia.
Point exactly. That is my point exactly.
Well, who killed all the Marines in the Beirut barracks?
No,
if you want to go terror attack for terror attack, we can.
You're not answering the question. Okay. Points here. I am very clearly answering your questions, but you continue to try to divert away from the facts and the truth that I'm presenting to you and to your viewers about the threats that face us in this country.
It's tough. I asked you a specific question. I asked you a specific question about Iran. We didn't get an answer. We got to leave it there. We appreciate it. Thank you for being here. We'll have you back anytime.
Have a great day.
You too. Happy Easter.
That was insanely embarrassing. Leland Vittert made an ass of himself there. I mean, that was bad, dude. Oh my God. Okay, so first of all, the reason why Tulsi brought up Saudi Arabia is because that specific ideology which fuels radical Islam around the world, it's Wahhabi/Salafi terrorism. So it's a very particular strain of ideology, basically ultra-fundamentalist far-right Islam is what it is. And she brings that up because that's the connecting strain when it comes to terrorism around the world, is that when it comes to, I should be clear, Islamic terrorism around the world, those are the perpetrators. In the overwhelming majority of cases, those are the perpetrators. It's not going to be, you're not going to find like Sufi Muslims doing this. You're not going to find even Shia Muslims doing this. And so what she's saying is, hey, wait a second, there was this terror attack, and the biggest contribution that we have that leads to that is propping up the Saudi Arabian government, which spreads this radical version of Islam around the world. They fund radical mosques all over the place. They also arm and prop up Al-Qaeda in Yemen. They arm and prop up jihadists in Syria. We also have directly armed and propped up jihadists in Syria for geopolitical motives, cynical geopolitical motives that have to do with combating Russia and their sphere of influence. So how do we not contribute to this? Well, stop fucking propping up Saudi Arabia and stop propping up, moderate rebels, so-called moderate rebels in Syria who are actually jihadist aligned. That's what you do to stop this. Furthermore, Jill Stein's policy from 2016, people may not have caught on then, but she's 100% correct when she says, let's just stop arming human rights violators, full stop. Whether it be Israel, whether it be Saudi Arabia, whether it be these ragtag groups of jihadists, just stop being the number one arms exporter around the world. And to the extent we sell any arms, we should only do it to people who have relatively clean human rights records. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. So this is the stuff that Tulsi is kind of alluding to. And what does this guy bring up? He says, in the Sri Lankan terror attack, well, wouldn't it just lead to more of this if the U.S. Pulls out from around the world? Excuse you? We're currently bombing 8 different countries. We're currently bombing Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, and I'm missing one. I think Niger. Or I think I'm missing one more too. See, that's the thing. There's so many I can't even keep up with all of them. But we're bombing all those countries. And the connection he makes is, well, obviously we need to continue intervening everywhere and bombing everywhere. Or else there's going to be more of the Sri Lankan terror attacks. But hold on. That terror attack happened. And we've been bombing everywhere for such a long time now. So by your logic, shouldn't our fucking bombing of everywhere have totally stopped terrorism by now? Again, that's the implication of the point that Leland is making, and that's just not true. We know that's not true. So what a weird thing to say. That's the takeaway that you have from a disgusting, grotesque terror attack is, well, obviously we need to bomb more places. So what do you want to do? You want to invade Sri Lanka, tough guy? Is that what you want to do? What the fuck is wrong with you? I mean, they cynically weaponize horrific incidents to try to push for the ideology they already have. Let me be clear, no matter what happens around the world, they will then use it to justify neoconservatism and American exceptionalism and U.S. interventionism. You understand? And we've seen this time and time again. During the Bush years, what happened? When we were in Iraq and we did the surge and the violence came down and everything was more calm, what did they say? Well, obviously, it's because of the surge, the violence came down, so the answer is always more U.S. troops. More war. That's the answer. But then what would happen is after a while, the violence would go back up. And what would they say? They'd turn around and say, well, I mean, the violence is up, so obviously we got to stay there to make sure the violence comes back down. So you understand how they set it up? It becomes a non-falsifiable claim. You understand? Well, when the violence is down, we have to be there. When the violence is up, we got to be there. It's almost like no matter what, you're going to come away with the same take. that we got to be there. I mean, obviously, wouldn't there be more Sri Lankan terrorist attacks, even though there's no logical connection at all here? But wouldn't there be more terror attacks like that if we withdraw from the world? What? That makes no sense. And then the worst part is, what does he do? He immediately smears her and goes to, well, you said that we should not, attack the Syrian government and Bashar Assad. Yeah, and she's also correct about that. Why is she correct about that? Assad's no threat to us. It used to be the duh position that, hey, the only time we should use U.S. military force is if there's a direct threat of violence against us. Now, maybe there's instances of like, hey, us and the world together can go and fight. If there's a genocide happening somewhere and we want to stop it, yeah, we can go at it together with the world. Unfortunately, nowadays, oftentimes we're aiding the genocide like we're doing in fucking Yemen right this second. But for direct military action, unilateral action, shouldn't it be? There's a direct threat of violence against us. Is Bashar Assad about to attack Nebraska, Leland, Vichert? Is that what he's going to do? No, it's not what he's going to do. And why are you bringing up the Assad government, whatever you think of them? They're a secular government. So what the fuck does Tulsi Gabbard not wanting to attack a secular sovereign government, what does that have to do with a fundamentalist Muslim terror attack, a Salafi terror attack? We think at this point, to be fair, none of the details are out yet, but we think that's what it is. What does that have to do with what's happened in Sri Lanka? It's got nothing to do with it. What does Iran have anything to do with what happened in Sri Lanka? Here's the answer. It has nothing to do with it. Bupkis. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Nothing at all. They're a secular government in Syria. And in Iran, it's a Shia theocracy, admittedly terrible. You can say both these governments are terrible for various reasons. But that's not the ideology that's doing Muslim fundamentalist terror attacks. It's just not. And if you act like it is, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You just have no idea what you're talking about. None whatsoever. It's like when Trump was asked back in the Republican primary, and he didn't know, he didn't know the difference between Sunni and Shia, but on the Hugh Hewitt radio show, he didn't know the difference between Hamas and Hezbollah. Like, that's the kind of shit that Leland's spewing here. He's like, well, what about Syria? What about Syria? I thought we were talking about what happened in Sri Lanka. Yeah, but you don't want to bomb Syria. Yeah, and she's right. What the fuck does that have to do with what's happening in Sri Lanka? Oh, but what about Iran? What about Iran? What about Iran? That's got nothing to do with what's happening there by any stretch of the imagination. What do you mean, what about Iran? And then checkmate from Tulsi when she goes, who did 9/11? Where did they come from? He's like, yeah, they came from Saudi Arabia. That's right. So she's concerned about not just the government of Saudi Arabia. She's concerned about that specific fundamentalist ideology. But she's right to be concerned about that. She's right about that. And then the most hilarious part of this whole video was his response. Who attacked the Marines in the barracks? Do you guys know what year he's going back to find, like Iran-backed terrorism? Do you know what year he went back to? Do you know what year he went back to? You know when that attack happened? 1983. Bro, what? This motherfucker went back to a year before I was born. And I'm 31, son. Who are you kidding? The idea that Iran is the number one exporter of terrorism is like saying Cuba is the number one exporter of terrorism. It's just not true. It's not remotely true. Jesus fucking Christ, this shit is obvious. But he's drunk on that DC elite propaganda. Like, the number one threats are Iran, and then Russia, and then also, Venezuela. Maduro is going to attack Toledo. Shut the fuck up, man. You're in over your head. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Imagine bringing up Syria and Iran in a conversation about terrorism in Sri Lanka. He was looking for an angle to smear Tulsi. And it didn't have to make sense. He just had to put it out there. And, Tulsi, I know that she was being bombarded with smears there, and so she was on the defensive, and she had to, do jujitsu and whatnot, but bottom line is this. Would Tulsi Gabbard, try to begin decoupling our terrible relationship with Saudi Arabia and stand up to Saudi Arabia and, maybe cut back arms to some of these jihadist groups and some of the human rights violators, I think she would do that. So she's right on that front, although probably, I would maybe want her to go further down that road than she might be willing to if she gets elected. And she's also right about, hey, let's not try to do regime change in Syria. Let's not try to do regime change in Iran. She's actually correct on both things, but it's presented as if she's like, I don't know, being a hypocrite or something because she doesn't want to topple the Syrian government or the Iranian government, but she's against terrorism in Sri Lanka. Don't try to make sense of it. Fox is a smear machine. And that was honestly embarrassing from Leland Vittert. I'm not kidding. When I was on the show, I was on twice. Both times I was on, he was way more reasonable with me. Way more reasonable. And he even asked a couple good questions on the spot that I give him credit for when I was on. But this was like, what are you doing, man? What are you saying? Fucking Sri Lankan terrorism, and you're trying to connect it to the fact that Tulsi rightly doesn't want to get involved in Syria and Iran? What's wrong with you?